Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to our latest episode of Bandofla. I'm really pleased to be able to bring you a very special guest all the way from Texas in America. People following us on Twitter will have seen quite a bit of support from Bandofla for Delilah Barrios, and I'm delighted to have Delilah with us for this session. Delilah, welcome to Bandofla.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to join you for this conversation. It was nice talking on the phone the other day, and I think it's a little bit more pleasant having to, get to see the other person for these conversations. And thank you for your support and everything.
No problem, Delilah. Okay, we're going to touch on some fairly big ticket issues. But I guess for people listening, I think it would be a good place to start to just explain to listeners who Delilah Barrios is.
That is a good question. No. So my name is Delilah Barrios. I'm a candidate for governor of Texas on the Green Party ticket. I am a mother and I'm a healthcare worker and I'm a socialist. And Texas is a big state and it's always been my home. We're a very diverse lot. And, I kept feeling let down by politics and policies or lack thereof. So I really wanted to be able to represent the poor and working class better in this state and be firm in our commitment to the people and not, profits and capitalism.
Okay, so I mean, you've given a flavor in terms of why you decided to become political, why you've entered politics. I mean, some of what do you think are? I mean, we're going to touch on some issues, but for the people that you want to represent, what do you think are the biggest challenges at the moment facing people in Texas?
I think a lot of people are still a bit indoctrinated by the, corporate establishment media, but the younger generations seem a bit more aware of the situation and are noticing the flaws in the media and how our stories are being told. And yeah, it's kind of hard. I think one of the biggest challenges is just being a censored candidate, being, pretty much, I mean, for instance, we went to a parade I think a year ago, and we paid to be in the parade and, get to meet with people and just show people who we were and what we were doing. And we were completely erased from the media. And, this was like one of my first lessons in that whole game that, there are two corporate entities, two wings of the same bird, the Democrats and the Republicans in this state and this country, especially. And they do not care what real people need and want. They only are conditioning them for consent. And so it was really a bit of like I had done podcasting before with other groups online, and part of our whole media goal was to offer the other insight and be the ones who may not be saying the same stories, but like we're covering the same issues. You're just not, these are stories you're not supposed to be paying attention to. And one of the things that we like to do is make sure that people are hearing that voice. And, when I got involved with this candidacy, I'm only one person, so I couldn't commit to both. And there's just such a need in the media to really platform and offer a voice to those people like myself who are denied that on a regular basis.
How does the Green Party get over that, Delilah? Because it's a pretty big barrier to overcome.
Yeah.
And with everything going on around the world, people I speak to are becoming significantly more sympathetic and understanding of the green agenda, and
Hmm.
the fact that, you know, our planet is giving us so many signs that it's in a bad place. Um, and even with that kind of growing awareness, you know, I know here in the UK, the Green Party has a lot of, like, everyone kind of likes the Green Party, but there's, I don't know, for some reason, people don't move away, like you say, from the traditional kind of parties. You know,
Mm.
I'm not sure why that is, because their policies are sound. There's quite strong socialist values and principles, and I've seen some, you know, the policies that, you know, your party present, and it's policies that I can relate to really strongly, as a socialist, as a fellow socialist. How do you get over that really big barrier?
Um, for our state specifically, just as far as like the voter suppression and candidate suppression tactics, we had to pay a large sum of money to get on the ballot, and I'm really thankful and grateful for all the people that donated, because most of the people giving us money are poor, unemployed, or otherwise, burdened individuals, and they saw fit to spend their limited resources on this campaign and making sure that they were offered a voice on the ballot. So that's just one area. And, a lot of it is just uh, the more myself I am, the easier it is for people to join what we're working on. So I think when I was first starting, a lot of people were telling me I needed to like tone it back, or, not speak to the issues so honestly, I guess, or maybe make it not sound so, they're like, don't scare people. And it's like, I wouldn't be running for office if I wasn't a little scared of what's happening, in regards to our environment, climate, and, the right wing trajectory towards fascism that's supported by both parties, so I think just trying to bring a bit of joy into this aspect has been helpful. I think that's one way that we're getting around a lot of the censorship and things like that. And honestly, everybody that's been helpful, either paid or volunteer, are real people who just want somebody to speak to the struggles. Somebody that's genuine, who knows what it's like living paycheck to paycheck, or worrying about things like your services going out, public utilities, things like that. So I think it's just that genuine human connection and need to be amongst your own people, to be among people that have the same values and cares and concerns as you and experience, that's all very valid. And so despite that I don't have the millions of dollars to spend that the other people do, I have that. I have the human connection that I share with a lot of people. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens this election, because I know that I've been a bother to the other folks, and I'm really glad to be so because it's so important to agitate, right? As
Absolutely.
I've been an activist for a really long time, and agitation is one of the best methods, to make a difference, to disrupt what's happening, and to show that you don't consent for what's happening. And it's a very powerful tool. So I'm always really intrigued to expand on those lessons and those methods, and
Mm.
share what I've learned with others too.
Yeah, I mean, some great thoughts there, and just for the benefit of listeners, just so that they can get an understanding of the kind of political setup in terms of the governor role. There's significant autonomy in terms of how, you know, how Texas would be run. Basically, you effectively have control of all the instruments in terms of how, you know, how the policies are implemented. Just give listeners a bit of an insight just in terms of how that works.
Um, Let me just offer a bit of history, for recent history for the state to illustrate a better picture for politics in the state. Last year, under the presidency of Joe Biden, Texas put in effect a law called SB 8, which effectively put a bounty on people's heads, either those seeking care or those helping provide access to said healthcare, and specifically in regards to reproductive health, abortion, and things like that. And so this happened last year, and it wasn't until the general election in November started coming up within the 6 months that Democrats started saying, "Oh, Roe v. Wade's on the ballot this year, and we're going to change it," but not a single one of their candidates would be willing to risk their employment, risk their safety to fight for these policies that we all need. And, myself and my children have been down to the Capitol, been down to the governor's mansion to protest these very aggressive and anti-human laws that are actively harming a lot of communities. So, people like Greg Abbott, who once that happened, and I successfully predicted that it would happen elsewhere in other states because that would set the precedent for the laws. And that's what's happened in other states subsequently, unfortunately. And not only anti-women laws, but anti-trans and LGBTQIA plus people. All of this is a very, steep slope toward the end goal of keeping the populace impoverished indefinitely, and subjected to. They've already admitted they don't want the college to be free, and they don't want healthcare to be free, because otherwise, how would they incentivize people to join the military?
Mm.
And it's those things. Greg Abbott has manipulated the laws in his favor, and at this point, the states have more rights, more legal precedent than the federal government does. So we see that with the, cannabis laws are not, like, you cannot recreationally use marijuana in the country, depending on where you are. There's a lot of states that don't legislate that or allow people to use that medicine. And Texas is one of them. And immediately, I mean, day one, we can change so much for so many people because
Mm.
the power of the pen is, you've seen how he has used it for his agenda. We can
Mm.
use it towards the socialist agenda in the state.
Yeah. Is that applied to CBD oil as well? The
Yeah, I think that there's some, FDA requirements for, those kind of things. Like, it's the cannabis is being more and more accepted culturally and socially, which is
absolutely.
helping, and the laws are kind of reflecting on the behavior. But on the other end, we have police who refuse to, they believe they're above the law. So even if you are not following the laws, you could still be subjected to, being behind bars and probably lifelong penalized for things like that. So, yeah, I mean, I think CBD oil is not a drug class at this
Mm.
moment, but it changes
Yeah.
depending on.
I find it almost quite not amusing, but certainly interesting that, I mean, when we spoke before, and we were talking about the gun laws and the fact that there's no requirement to have a license to carry a firearm in Texas, which I find quite fascinating.
Mm.
I'll admit to you, Delilah, if I was in America, that would scare me. That would really scare me, because here in the UK, when we see Trojan, which is what they call the police who carry firearms, or the diplomatic units, it's quite intimidating. So the fact that they can allow people in Texas to carry a firearm without a license, but legally people aren't allowed to have a joint, I find it quite, it's quite bizarre. But all right, let's touch on that. That was really helpful. Let's touch on immigration, because obviously Texas is obviously has a massive border with Mexico, and when Trump was running, that was a real kind of focal point in whipping up anti-immigration sentiment. The whole story is with the wall, building the wall, who's going to pay for it, etc., etc. And you touched on kind of populist policies, which a lot of far-right governments are developing movements. But how would you see immigration policies mapping out under your leadership?
I'm just going to go ahead and say that I just want to point out that Biden has deported more people than Trump did. And so I'm really disgusted with the idea that somehow the Democrats are less cruel to humans than the Republicans are. I just want to make sure that everybody knows that, because I feel very strongly about that. Living in Texas,
point, because the media certainly doesn't cover that here. It's almost a moot point. So it's good. It's important that you do make that point. If that is indeed the case. But sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, yeah, it's under the Title 42. I can show you some information on it later, but we have refugees not only from Mexico, but we have them from South and Central America, and people from Haiti, people from all over the world are coming to the country because of our role, the military industrial complex. Often, one of the largest contributors to emissions and climate change are destabilizing all these other countries. And if not for our influence, things would be better. More people would be less likely to migrate in the ways that they are now. They're fleeing very unhealthy situations where their lives are at risk. And I think it's a humanitarian crisis, and that the media is not really explaining that in a way that humans can understand it is very telling on who they're supporting and what agendas they're happy to support. Because most people, despite that I live in a red state, don't hate immigrants, and they don't hate people who have fallen on hard times or are struggling. They relate very well to them. And so, as an Indigenous woman, I don't believe that there are any immigrants on stolen land. This land does not belong to settlers, and their laws do not reflect our values. And for me, clearly whatever we can do to speed up the process and make sure that people are able to find housing and jobs and stability, it's honestly our duty as an imperialist nation to provide for the people that we're displacing through our military actions. So it's really about accountability, from a standpoint of being an American. It's that we have an obligation to these people, because we're the reason that they have to leave more often than not.
Yeah, we're seeing that. We're seeing that in the UK here as well, and obviously the conflict with Ukraine and Russia. The British government has welcomed with open arms refugees. People escaping the conflict. If you're, kind of white Christian, they've been very welcoming, which is good. But anyone with darker skin, if you're from Syria or Afghanistan or Sudan, or if you're Kurdish, it's, people are really having a difficult time. So they've brought in a two-tier system on that immigration, and they've coined the phrase illegal immigrants, which the media really use. And we try and say to them, look, no one's illegal. How demeaning, how much more demeaning can we get to call someone illegal, a human person? It's just disgusting. But okay, I think it's great to get that kind of indigenous aspect. It's a really good vibe. That's really cool. you work in healthcare, in theatre, right? What's the obviously there's people have heard of what Obama tried to do with Obama care. What's the situation with healthcare if you haven't got insurance in America or in Texas?
So one of our organizers down in McAllen, Texas, was sharing about the issues that she has pretty decent healthcare, and she still goes across the border to get dental work and other things because it's more accessible there, and you won't end up spending as much money. So we have a for-profit model in Texas in the US, and
Yeah.
yeah, so for somebody who does not have health care, and they need help, they have to go to a place that, like a clinic that has public funding or something like that. And it's really not as efficient as it could be. You know, if you look up the CEOs, and I tell a lot of my coworkers this all the time because wages are a thing and it's a demanding field to work. And they're like, I don't want to ask for a raise, or I don't think that I can bargain for my worth. And even though Texas is a right to work state, there's ways that you can bargain. I might be getting off subject a little bit, but let me just finish telling the story.
Yeah, no
And
worries.
I just tell them, look up the CEO's pay and then tell me that you don't deserve more money for what you do, because what you do is more significant and your labor has more value than what they do. Keep that in mind when you're worrying about being humble about how much you should make, because at the very least, you should be making the living wage, you know? And people in this state uh, are not always guaranteed that. And of course, health insurance is tied to your employment. So, there's a lot of discrepancies, I will say. And I do see a lot of waste in that sector. And I feel that we're failing a lot of people actually by propping up the system that is not very efficient.
Yeah, I mean, it is scary that if you haven't got access to healthcare, if there's an emergency situation, you can call an ambulance, though, can't you? In that situation.
I don't want to, oh God. Um, I don't really want to ruin your day, but yeah, an ambulance could come, and it could be one that charges you, something like $12,000, or one that charges you $48,000, depending on fate or your place where you live. There was an article I read where two people, a couple, got into a car accident, and they had to get star flighted, which is by a helicopter,
Mm.
to a hospital for care. And they each got two different bills for that service from different carriers. And because it's a more oh God, what's more privatized industry, that's what's
Mm.
happening. Yeah, the discrepancies are so huge. It could be, tens of thousands, perhaps even millions of dollars worth of care. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Same
yeah,
person essentially, and that's how crazy the system is here. So, ideally, you live in a place where an ambulance will come to you, but there are places where you might have to wait several hours, because there's a lot of, rural towns and areas out here. There's a lot of stretches of land, so
yeah.
it's probably not the most comforting thought, but
Yeah,
that's
I
just the
think I
reality.
think it's good for you to, shed light on that, because certainly our listener base in the UK, we've been saying to people that the government here are really trying to basically, look at the model in America. We're very lucky here. We have a fantastic state health service, national health service. We're very proud of
Mhm.
it. But people can phone for an ambulance, it will come, you don't pay, you can go and have your operations, major operations, heart operations, transplants, you don't pay. Um, although people argue that they pay their taxes and that's what pays for the treatments, you know, but
No, that's I'm just like imagining like, oh, that would be such a beautiful. Imagine if there were no debt collectors for, needing an emergency surgery. Or like
yeah,
it sounds like a fairy tale because I've never experienced that kind of healthcare system. So yeah, I think honestly, I would be proud too. Is it the NHS?
yeah.
Is that what it's called?
Mm.
Hmm. Yeah, I was talking to an orthopedic surgeon not long ago, and somebody was trying to talk poorly on socialism. And he wasn't arguing against socialism. He only made the point that when he was a resident and he went, I don't remember if it was, you know, some area of Europe, and he said he got paid better as a resident there than here. And that's just to highlight that the money's not going to the doctors. And you know what I'm saying? Where the wealth is being stolen, it's not a benefit. They try to divide us among the working class that, and I think at this point the illusion has failed. And even people who wouldn't consider themselves political at all could easily agree that they want, Medicare for all or
Yeah,
statewide single payer because it just makes sense. And why wouldn't you want to save people's lives when you can?
absolutely. I think that's something I wanted us to touch on, that because people here need to understand we have to appreciate and love what we have. Otherwise, if the whole privatization picks up pace, we could quite easily find ourselves with a scary situation, which I think the Texas residents and people living in other states have to have pay extortionate amounts for health insurance to just be able to have that care ready if they need it, you know. So, all right, let's touch on the issue of the Black Lives Matter movement, which kind of it's been gathering pace for a while. In many countries, it's only seems to have kind of really picked up since the murder of George Floyd, but it's been going for a while. Um, and what really frightens me, Delilah, is that if you go back to Rodney King, which was like the first time it was captured on camera, I think it was in '93.
I was just thinking of that as you were speaking. I was like, I remember that Rodney
Yeah,
King.
and then the riots in LA, and it really, I don't even know what all the numbers are in terms of young black men and women who have been effectively murdered by different police departments, and it's only recently one was held to account in the high profile case, but you we talked about defunding the police, and that's gathering momentum in America, certainly in some states more than others. Um, how just explain, because people are a bit worried when they hear defunding the police. It's like, oh my God, if we defund the police, where's law and order going to kick in? How's it going to work? So that's what some of the narrative that we see here in the UK. So um, I have a lot of sympathy with that whole concept because we even see, a degree of corruption here in the UK, very poor investigations into missing persons, kind of depending on what background the person is from. If they're fairly wealthy, they get, they're in the media a lot. But when it comes to a black family, it's, the coverage isn't the same. So give us your thoughts on the whole kind of concept around defunding the police.
Yeah, there's a lot of criticism for calling it that. And listen, it doesn't matter who's coming up with the name. The idea is to cause that fear with people. That's, I'm sure the police force perhaps even came up with calling it that themselves. Who knows? But the concept of it is just a reallocation of resources. So for myself personally, I've had mostly horrible experiences with police, especially as a woman of color. And I went to a rally and a march the other day with some really wonderful organizers, indigenous people in San Antonio, or as they love to call it, Yanawana. And I carried a red dress, and the red dress is to signify the missing, murdered indigenous women. And it's the whole thing is that these women end up missing and murdered and are taken from their communities, and nobody cares. And that's why this movement came up. And in and we often stand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter because they do, because we're all being oppressed under this system. And our alliance is more important because we're no, we're just as disposable as the others in the eyes of colonialism and capitalism, which created these forces. The police specifically exist not to help you, but to deny you your rights to make your voices heard, your rights to organize against things that harm you in your community. So, as somebody who went down and spent some time with people in Uvalde, and I'm sure you remember we spoke briefly on that before, but it was the massacre at Robb Elementary.
Yeah.
And a lot of the families down there, whether or not they lost their children that day, their whole entire community has been put through shock, and they're all collectively, dealing with these symptoms. And not a single one of them has any love or loyalty to the police. And in fact, a lot of people from the town um, protested for several nights to make sure that the police officers for the school were all fired because they did, a disservice and a tragedy and a cruelty to their community. So I look to that as a inspiration for this movement because, why shouldn't we? That their police budget is 40% of the city's budget. It's a really small town, but 40% of the money coming in is going to the police who acted horribly. And why shouldn't that money go towards clinics or after school programs or more libraries or things like that? And so really when people come up with their concerns about calling it defund the police or the entire movement, um, it's really important to have these conversations with, well, don't you think that we could be doing better in this sector? Don't you think? And really, it's just a horrible waste of resources. And you, as a citizen, are entitled to those resources, and you should make sure that they go to the places that you want them to. I don't think a lot of people realize how much money the police unions have. That gives them more political pull, and so often, whoever is elected might happen to be, making promises to people or budgets to people that may or may not be in the best interest of the public. So, even if people don't elect me, I hope that they'll continue on and advocate for themselves and their rights.
I think you're right. I think that the phrase defunding the police is, it'd be interesting to see who came up with that. And you've explained really well, just even that one small example, having 40% of a whole town's budget. It's like, really, how can that be justified when people should have access to all sorts of other kinds of services to help them? So purely on that point alone, it's a very valid point. So I think these are all great points, Delilah, that will hopefully resonate with people who are going to be going to the ballot box. So let's keep them coming, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
please. Yesterday was the last day to register in this state. We don't have like same day registration or any of those perks. You have to have a valid disability, like physical disability, to get a mail-in ballot. And people are like, "What? You think voting is hard?" And I'm like, I think that if you're in a wheelchair, you shouldn't have to, go through all this process just to be able to have the convenience to vote from your home.
So
But I digress.
Postal voting is only available to someone who has a physical disability.
Yeah, from what I've learned, I think some active military members have that ability, but then again, we have their ballots being thrown away, discarded, and
Mm,
they're not here to,
yeah.
say anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a strong postal voter situation here in the UK. There's loads of people who that a lot of it is probably out of laziness and not wanting to go to the ballot box physically, especially if the weather's poor and it's raining.
Yeah.
But I mean, voter registration is really important, and people people have died for the right to vote. So it does annoy me when people kind of say, nothing's going to change, and it's like, well, if you don't vote, nothing will change. People have to collectively believe that by voting, you have a say and you can
Mhm.
influence. You become an influencer in the political game. So definitely. Okay, you far right politics in America. You referenced both Democrats and Republicans. I mean, things are quite polarized, and you're right. That's quite typical in a lot of countries around the world now. Um, there's almost very little difference between some of the major parties.
Mhm.
It's hard to tell them apart. How worried are you with the far right movement? Because there's lots of new groups uh,
Yeah.
starting up. How much of a concern is it for you? And what what plans would you have in terms of some education programs, maybe starting at in the schools for the kids at a young age, so that they learn. Mandela once said that you're not born with hate inside you. You know, it's a learned behavior. So I think that's always a great way to encourage people to not be bigoted and not to be intolerant. You know.
Um, I think that the short answer is yes, I am concerned. I think it's a problem. I think, as a woman, we already don't have rights, and I've been aware of that fact probably a little bit longer than others.
Mm.
But the fact is, we are in a moment when it's very blatant that our collective ideals are not being heard or respected. So, yeah, if you even look up hate groups, like there's a very large consolidation of them in this state. One of the things that brought me to activism is my culture and my history of strong women in my family who challenge and agitate and educate others, regardless of what anybody else thinks. And I feel very grateful to have that intuition. And I think one of my goals as a candidate is to empower more people to do the same thing. And, it does not take anger to make you a bigot. It just takes a lack of or willingness to understand. So a fear of understanding others is all that is, and you don't have to, you know, be a gun owner or be specifically racist to be a bigot. And I think a lot of people will get offended when I say that, and it's only out of caution because I think if you perhaps find yourself advocating for war, uh, that you might have to reconsider some of your policies. A lot of people are just regurgitating, what they've heard on the media, there's money behind these campaigns that
Yeah.
advance these right agendas, a lot of money. That's, and in states here, rather than, the Democrats doing something positive, with all of their money, all they want to do is outspend them. They don't even want to be better at representing anyone. So it is a concern, but it's not a new one. The fact that other people are seeing this concern is hopeful to me because I know that if people that I've never considered being capable of understanding are coming to me and saying, I never really thought of it before, but now it makes sense, makes a big difference difference, I think, because who are they talking to? Who's witnessing this revelation within them as well? And I really like to tell people, it's not a question of if there will be a revolution, it's just when, because collectively we are at a tipping point of our suffering, and there's only so much more we can handle. And I think finding your fellows and being empowered to speak up for yourself and demand better is a wonderful, beautiful thing that everybody can experience. And I urge them to do so, not just by voting either. There's, direct action and mutual aid too. Those are all very good collective ways for you to be involved. I just think that we're a bit, separated right now, not just from the polarizing politics, but from, the COVID and wage inequality and all of the other things that are really bad at this moment. Most people need a little bit of compassion, trying to nudge them to be more open-minded and to let other people in. And that's very understandable, but yeah, I am concerned, but I'm also hopeful for things.
Okay, cool. Okay, I think what you touched on how important community cohesion is and working with the different communities. How, in terms of Texas, because I know in some cities a lot of different ethnic groups kind of almost have a not a fear, but there's difficulty integrating with other ethnic groups. So how do you think it is going to be a good way to get lots of these communities to integrate, and for a strong, healthy community cohesion to benefit Texas?
You were talking about how like some immigrants are preferred than others, and it often has to do with the color of their skin.
Yeah.
I don't see a lot of that competition and division within people of color. I just, from what I have researched and read about and seen, most people are happy to integrate other communities into their spaces because they know that we enrich each other with, you know what I mean? Like, there are a lot of Haitian migrants who have been living in Mexico, and they're doing different blends of food, or Mexican restaurants will specialize in Haitian cuisine, and people from all over the world have had to relocate, and I think it's that we are really all, most people that come to the States comes from either they're immigrants or they are children of immigrants, and understand that you know it's a very hypocritical process to deny people the same rights that you had. So yeah, I'm not even sure if I fully answered your question. I just I think it's hard to, I think in LA they just had that city council person say some very racist, vile things about, I think, Black people. And a lot of us, of Latin descent or mixture or whatever, are just, like, we're like, oh, we've been trying to speak on this for some time. Shadeism is real and racism is real, and all these things are real. And now you're paying attention. Well, I'm glad you're paying attention. It's good to see that you are, but those people are not the majority of us. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They're around, but like most bigots, they might just be the loudest. That doesn't mean that, they're the most impactful, I should say.
Yeah, I get it. I get that. Okay, so obviously the Green Party are kind of, the whole mantra is, being there to protect the environment. In terms of your kind of political outlook on a green agenda, what do you think are the key environmental issues that you would really like to get your teeth into?
Oh, so I want to get my teeth into all of the environmental issues for my state. But so yeah, the fossil fuel subsidies is one of my big targets, because basically our communities are their money, their federal money is being used to poison them. And so we need to do something about that. That needs to be done. You know, there's lobbyists who work for these corporations that change the laws to reflect them, but there's also a lot of citizen watch groups and very environmentally concerned people who are keeping an eye on that now, finally. And so, yeah, that's definitely one issue. We are not investing enough in renewables, and it's a detriment to have more natural gas and crude oil pipelines than water pipelines, and adequate energy and internet and all of the other utilities that we need. So yeah, I think like we don't even have decent public transportation in this state. If somebody wants a job, they pretty much have to own a vehicle, and they have to own a vehicle and potentially only make something like 7.25 an hour. And a car, a new one costs 35, 45,000, something like that.
Wow.
Even a used one costs 20, 30. I mean, so logistically, it's very unsustainable what we're doing on all sectors. So
Mm.
I really want to do what I can. I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying. I mean, Texas has quite a warm, sunny climate, right?
Yeah, it's about 85 degrees outside right now.
Really. And how
Mhm.
much of the sun's energy is being utilized in terms of?
Not a lot. No, we have decent funding for wind energy in this state, but we do not have much else in solar or either kind of sector. So it's a lot of natural gas and coal and oil. So it's a problem because a lot of our communities, one of the other reasons I got involved politically is because we had a pipeline put through against most public opinion against everybody was like, no, no, we have an aquifer, we've got water that we need to protect, and
Mm,
it didn't matter. It didn't. We showed up, we made calls, we wrote letters, we did everything, and it did not matter at all. And we all had to sit there and collectively just slowly watch this horrible pipeline get put in, with the potential for it to be exported also, right? So it's not even going to stay for the people who live here. And they were ripping up, 100 heritage oak trees and contaminating karst springs. And it was really a vile, awful process. And at least locally, I think that brought a lot of awareness to people. So
mm,
any further expansion needs to be halted. I
mm,
want to ban fracking. I want all utilities to be publicly owned, and we just stop the fossil fuel subsidies and take that money and spend it elsewhere.
mm. It is disgusting what's being done to um, our environment, and the dangers that fracking brings. And when you have the opportunity to use renewable energy and you don't use it, you do question. But like you say, a lot of these organisations are getting huge subsidies, so it's not in their interest to do that. So I think you're spot on to have that critical focus in that area. Um, my concern, Delilah, is that it's going to get to a point that we can't keep taking from the land. At some stage, you know, there's going to be climate refugees. There's already climate refugees as a result of weather episodes that are becoming more and more extreme. And even the summit that they had in Scotland, where lots of countries were promising to, be a lot more environmentally savvy with their policies. People come together from around the world, the big nations, and they make these statements, but when they leave that summit, and then you don't really see much, and you see the little islands like the Seychelles, and there was some more, and I can't remember the name of the island near Western Samoa, and these are places that are in real danger of disappearing, once the water level starts to get higher and higher. But in the West, our leaders they're not connected with it, they don't understand it, or they deliberately don't care. I don't know. Just
I
terrible.
don't know either, and I'm sure a lot of those people will shut up via private jet or some other really, high carbon footprint mode of transportation. So it's very hypocritical, to just make a big presentation with no intention. And I think, honestly, as a as a brown woman, I'm just very tired of people taking our ideas and our intentions and then masquerading as somebody who cares or is somehow invested in the same struggles as the rest of us, and then uses their privilege to get elected or get into a place of power, and then completely, absolutely turn their back on the people who put them into the power. And I think that shows a real lack of respect for elected officials, in regards to the rest of the people. So, yeah, I think that there is a disconnection, but I think there's an obsession with money is often the culprit with these fake people that don't have any care, like actual care for, I think it's really hilarious. If you look, you can look up and see what billionaires live in your area. I don't know if you know that there's a website that does that. And the one that lives in Texas is Elon Musk. And I think it's so hilarious that he's a very fragile person and he can't take criticism very well. And in fact, I wonder if this episode will make very numbers at all, because the fact that I said that, and this person could spend their money, solving at least the homeless problem and housing crisis in this state alone easily, and they don't do that because they don't feel any pressure to do that. So, I'd rather not have philanthropists. I'd rather have people just pay their taxes and pay their fair share. They pay less percentage than we do often.
Well
So
said.
yeah, it's
Well said.
I could go on.
I didn't realize. I didn't realize Elon was living in Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, moving swiftly on. I mean, we're coming to the end of this interview, and I think people have had a real, insight into who you are, what you stand for, which is great. You touched on cost of living. I just want you to briefly touch on three quick subjects, and then I want to go into a little bit of a discussion around your Indigenous culture, because I think that's important for people to know a little bit more about you in that respect. But just in terms of, you mentioned the issue around anti-trans sentiment. What's the situation in Texas on that, and what protections would you bring in? Because there's, the trans community are one of the most persecuted groups in the world. The issue of abortion, obviously, you had the court case recently, the Wade case, and I can't remember what Texas's views were, if they had the mechanism ready to ban abortion on the back of that. What your position on abortion would be, and just quickly on the cost of living, because the cost of living is biting globally. I think no one is really escaping that unless you're very wealthy. I mean, I saw some figures in terms of just in the UK since 2010, which is when the current government's been in, their wealth went from, has increased by about 100 billion, and whereas the average pay of a worker, and you touched on this before with the CEO analogy, in real terms, our pay has actually gone down by a couple of pounds. So just on those three issues, if you can share your thoughts on those, please, Delilah.
The anti-trans legislation goes hand in hand with the anti-woman legislation.
Mm.
Uh, having, it's basically a pro-birth, pro-poverty type of legislation that really makes sure that communities and generations are, in debt for work or labor for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
So when you look at it from that perspective, it starts to make a lot of sense because there's a lot of industry that loves to exploit cheap labor in this state. So for trans people, especially, I am a pro autonomy candidate. Um, I was one of the few people who was against, because our steering committee put up a statement about the vaccine mandates. And, as an Indigenous person, like our autonomy is very important to us. And I was one of the few to say, I don't agree with that. I don't think that people should have, things forced on them that they don't consent to, especially if it's something new and they're unfamiliar with. All you have to do is think about the Muskie experiment on Black population, and the forced hysterectomies of women in ICE detention and things like that,
Yeah.
to understand where some of that, the concerns are. So I am very much for autonomy. As a woman in the state, a quote unquote dead body has more rights than I do as a patient. So just to put things into perspective, that's the reality of the situation. I think, you know, so my personal background makes me very committed to making sure that we have autonomy over our bodies and ourselves. As a candidate, I think that the for-profit healthcare is actually showing itself to be a detriment to patients' rights. And so that is another angle that if we could enact statewide single payer, the state would have more of an investment in allowing you to get the care you need. And that would actually be a benefit to trans youth and women, and, anybody else who's being, systemically abused by these systems. So those are, just, I know I kind of bundled it all together, but I wanted to give some background on why it's important to me. We don't, if a patient does not want care, we have to stop care. And that's one of the rights that people don't even know they have. People will go and they might be traumatized by an experience because they didn't know their rights. And so, we really need to do more to educate and empower people. But if I was elected, I would absolutely prioritize, healthcare and autonomy immediately. It's very important to me.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I've done a little bit of homework just to build my awareness around kind of the Indigenous population. So I was, fascinated in terms of, obviously we've recently had, was it yesterday, Indigenous Peoples Day?
On Monday.
Yeah.
On Monday.
Now, how offensive, apologies if this is a dumb question, right? But obviously it was previously referred to as Columbus Day. Given the history of the Indigenous people, I was doing some research and there's history there because I looked at the Bullock Museum resources, and they seem to have some really interesting archive material there. I don't know if that's regarded as a good reference point for historical purposes.
Honestly, it's very it's good research because this area specifically had a lot of artifacts that were preserved and collected, probably given much more care than the people who were living here at the time. But I digress. It is information, and that is very helpful to people. They have a lot of really good artifacts, and they have a decent. It's interesting because a lot of like Western culture does I'll say appropriate or fantasize indigenous culture
Yeah.
in a way that makes it seem that this culture is gone or has been extinct,
Mm.
or you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There's that framing that is untruthful, but it's important that at least they're acknowledging, you know, where they are and who was here when they came to collect the information they made public. So yeah, I think the Bullock Museum does try to do a lot of you know, have some accountability, I guess,
Yeah.
with their telling of history.
When you talk about accountability, I mean, let's be brutally honest. It's similar to kind of the British Empire. This was a massive colonization episode, and on the back of colonization, you normally see, assets being stripped, robbed. You see, unfortunately, death and destruction of indigenous people. How, in terms of, I know from a British Empire perspective, yes, the people say the empire was great, but they always look through a certain lens. They would never look through a truthful lens to show the warts, as well as the positive side. Um, how, as a collective, in terms of the indigenous people's movement, I'm guessing there's a lot of work being done on uncovering the true history and to bring some degree of accountability, some degree of reparation. Where is that movement currently, Delilah?
You know, I just have to give a lot of myself thanks and um, historical significance to people, colonized people all over the globe, especially the global south, being the leaders of revolutionary change and being the leaders of indigenous sovereignty and land rights, water rights, and protecting the environment. They've been leading this fight for a long time. And it wasn't until the late 70s here in America that indigenous people were allowed to perform their own ceremonies and express their own culture. So you have to understand the time frame, right, is very significant because you have people, you know, of all ages who have been experiencing this in real time, preserving their culture, you know, sharing their stories and lessons with, you know, their family and their friends. The fragility, the white fragility, is something that I'm personally exhausted with. I don't really care if somebody feels offended with a word that I used. I care whether or not they're going to go home and do some research or going to do what they can to become a better ally and activist themselves. So again, you know, I'm from the state. Uh my dad's skin is, you know, like we're dark people. We never had the ability to hide who we were or where we came from.
Mm.
And so we, you know, against most cultural manipulation, we were proud of ourselves despite what people were telling us. And now there's this resurgence of reclaiming oneself and learning your history and decolonizing. That's really, you know, it's not just a personal thing. It's a movement being built. You know, a lot of us talk about land back.
Mm.
You know, a lot of people want to bring up reparations, but really, it's land back is our main focus because
Okay.
yes, we want our lands returned to us so that we can, you know, not hoard them like the Western culture has, but we want to protect them and make them of public use because we know that the significance of water and land and habitat we've always known. And you know, after settlers have laid waste to most of this land, they want to come ask us if they can take our ideas too, and have our consent to continue, you know, doing the same thing that they've been doing. Greenwashing is not going to really help any of us in this situation. So from our perspective, it's that, you know, indigenous deserve their land back. They deserve sovereignty, and we really have to worry about not just our areas, but the entire globe. So it's not just like a movement here. It's not just a movement in South America. It's a global movement that is it is really nice to see happening, where it's spreading and everybody's talking about it and educating themselves on. So that's just part of it. Yes, we do want our land back. Yes, we do want to have clean water. Yes, we do want to have say over what corporations are trying to, you
Mm.
know, contaminate and ruin our resources that we rely on. It's all of those things. Doesn't
Yeah,
matter that people don't like it, but those are the rights that we're reclaiming.
yeah. No, brilliant. And at the moment, am I right in saying that Texas only recognizes three indigenous tribes? Is that right?
That is true. That is true. Yes.
Okay.
But there are much more tribes that are from this,
Yeah,
from
yeah,
Texas.
yeah. No, I mean, I was looking at the, forgive me for the pronunciations, but Atacapa tribe,
Hmm.
Karankawa, and
Hmm.
those are the more historic ones. But well, listen, I hope that campaign continues to gain momentum, Delilah, because that cultural heritage aspect is so important. It's part of who we are, part of who you are, and it's important that future generations have the opportunity to make sure that none of that disappears. So
Yeah, it's there's really not a lot of uh it's we are one people. We know that.
yeah,
You know, we want to stop recognizing capitalism and colonialism and these structures that are harming us. And we need everybody's help to do that.
yeah,
So
okay.
it's
So
important and
you're
significant. Thank you for talking
Yeah,
on that.
no worries, no worries.
Offering.
It's a point important to me as well. Because I see those challenges being replicated across the world. You're right. It's not just unique to the native people in Texas or the other states. You're seeing cultural heritage literally being diluted in so many different countries. Okay, so you're standing for governor in Texas in the name of the Green Party, and I will give you the opportunity for some final thoughts in terms of your final message, because we will encourage all the people to share this as widely as possible, certainly in the state of Texas. So in terms of people going to the ballot box and putting an X by your name, what's your give your three key reasons why they should be doing that.
Oh, I just wanted to mention that I'm not the only candidate, the only Green Party candidate on the ballot this year.
Okay,
So we have two others.
excellent.
So Delilah Barrios for governor, and we've got Alfred Mollison for land commissioner, and we have Hunter Crow for railroad commissioner, which is a really important role because they actually, despite what the name is, they handle pipelines.
Oh, okay.
That
My
sector
apologies to
handles.
Alfred and Hunter. And we wish
No, that's okay.
we wish
They're
them
actually a
success as
little
well.
they're a little camera shy, and it's fine. But I bring them up too because I want people to vote for them as
Yep.
well. Yes, so Delilah for Texas, my three key issues are Medicare for all y'all, recreational legal marijuana, and we need to drastically improve the affordability and cost of living and quality of life in the state for people. So please vote for me if you want to see impactful change as soon as possible. Climate crisis isn't fun for any of us, so let's really prioritize that. And I think if even if you feel fear mongered into voting for one of the other two parties, or if you're being told that a vote for me is insignificant, know that it carries more weight than voting for the other two parties who don't even care about your needs.
Okay. There's some powerful points to finish on, Delilah. You know, on behalf of Bandofla, we really genuinely wish you well in the rest of your campaign. You've literally got 3 weeks before 3-4 weeks before the
Yeah, it's
you know, so all this time before you know it, that that time will be there. So but we'll be plugging this, and we wish you the very best for the elections, and for Alfred, and for Hunter as well, for your other Green Party colleagues. So thank you for joining us on Bandofla. My name is Fevzi Hussain. I'm your host. Keep safe, everyone, and see you soon.